On a crisp autumn morning in 1996, a light blue Chevrolet Impala was captured on grainy security footage leaving the small town of Oakridge, North Carolina. Inside were Thomas and Maria Sullivan with their two children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old James. The family smiled and waved to the gas station attendant as they departed for what should have been a weekend camping trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains. That ordinary November moment would become the last confirmed sighting of the Sullivan family alive. 25 years later, what began as a perplexing disappearance would unravel into one of North Carolina's most chilling murder cases, exposing the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight in their quiet community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. November 9, 1996, was typical for western North Carolina. Cool temperatures hovering around 50 degrees with patches of lingering fog in the valleys and a gentle breeze rustling through trees painted in brilliant autumn colors. The Sullivan family was known throughout Oakridge, a close-knit town of just under 5,000 residents. Thomas, 42, worked as a high school science teacher, well-liked for his patient manner and dry humor. His wife Maria, 39, managed the local library, where her reading programs had become legendary among the town's children. That Saturday morning, they packed their blue Impala for a weekend camping trip in the mountains, a family tradition they had maintained for years. They were so excited about this trip, recalled Margaret Phillips, Maria's best friend. They'd been planning it for weeks, talking about seeing the last of the fall colors before winter set in. Security footage from Cooper's gas station on the edge of town showed Thomas filling up the tank at 8:17 a.m. while Maria and the children purchased snacks inside. The attendant, Carl Davis, remembered them clearly. The kids were bouncing around, talking about seeing bears. Thomas paid with his credit card and said they'd be back Sunday evening. The family then drove west along Route 25, heading toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. At 9:45 a.m., they stopped at a diner in Westbrook, about 40 miles from Oakridge. Waitress Jenny Coleman served them breakfast, pancakes for the kids, coffee and eggs for the parents. They seemed like any normal, happy family, she later told police. The little girl was drawing on a paper napkin while her brother told me all about the tent they were going to set up. Security cameras captured the Impala leaving the diner parking lot at 10:32 a.m., turning onto the mountain highway that wound deeper into the National Forest area. This was the last confirmed sighting of the Sullivan family. When Monday morning arrived and Thomas didn't show up for his first period chemistry class, the school principal called their home. No answer. By Monday afternoon, Maria hadn't appeared at the library for a scheduled children's reading hour, something utterly out of character. Margaret Phillips used her spare key to check the Sullivan home and found it undisturbed, with no signs of the family's return. Their overnight bags weren't there, the camping equipment was gone, but something felt wrong, Margaret later recalled. The house was too perfect, too untouched. And their dog, Rusty, was still at the neighbors where they'd left him for the weekend. At 7:35 p.m. on Monday, November 11th, Margaret placed a call to the Oakridge Police Department. Her voice trembled as she reported, "The Sullivan family went camping on Saturday and they haven't come back. Something's happened to them." Within hours, what began as a welfare check exploded into one of the largest search operations in western North Carolina history. Chief of Police Robert Donovan, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and perpetually tired eyes, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation, an entire family vanishing in the vast wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Time is critical in these cases, Donovan told his officers as they gathered at headquarters on Tuesday morning. If they're lost or injured in the mountains, every hour counts. By dawn on Tuesday, November 12th, police had established the Sullivans' intended campsite location based on a camping permit found in their home office. A search grid was mapped across Ravens Ridge, a popular but somewhat remote camping area within the National Forest. Helicopters from the state police swept low over dense forest, their spotlights cutting through early morning mist. Search teams with trained dogs combed through hiking trails and camping areas. Park rangers checked every official campsite and registry. Local volunteers, many of whom knew the Sullivan family personally, joined the effort in unprecedented numbers. "We had over 200 people searching by the second day," recalled Deputy Sarah Holden, who coordinated the volunteer efforts. Teachers from Thomas's school, parents of children who attended Maria's reading hours, neighbors, everyone came out to help. But as the search expanded, an unsettling reality emerged. There was no sign of the Sullivans at any established campsite. No evidence of their blue Impala on any forest road. The campsite listed on their permit was empty, with no indication anyone had been there recently. On the third day of searching, a ranger discovered what appeared to be tire tracks leading off Pine Creek Road, a winding route through the mountains. The tracks suggested a vehicle had veered from the pavement onto a barely visible fire road, but recent rain had washed away much of the evidence. K9 units brought to the area picked up no human scent. The helicopter spotted no glint of metal through the thick canopy. The fire road eventually led to a cliff overlooking Blackwater Gorge, a steep ravine with a river rushing 200 feet below. Officer Ryan Martinez peered over the edge, his flashlight beam swallowed by darkness. "If a car went over in this area, it would be nearly impossible to spot from above," he reported. "The water's high this time of year, and there are dozens of underwater caves and recesses." A specialized diving team was called in from Raleigh. For 2 days, they battled dangerous currents and near-zero visibility, searching the riverbed below the cliff. They recovered an old washing machine, several tires, and a rusted bicycle, but no car, no bodies, no sign of the Sullivan family. "It's like they vanished into thin air," Chief Donovan told a growing crowd of reporters a week after the disappearance. "We've checked every campsite, every road, every trail. We've interviewed everyone who saw them that Saturday. And we have nothing." As November turned cold and the first snow dusted the mountains, the search scaled back. Resources were limited, and the harsh reality of mountain weather made continuing at full capacity impossible. The case remained open, but the daily searches ended, leaving a community in limbo and a family's fate unknown. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the weeks following the Sullivans' disappearance, investigators began methodically examining every aspect of the family's life. Bank records showed Thomas had withdrawn $300 the day before they left, a reasonable amount for a weekend trip. Credit card statements revealed nothing unusual, just routine purchases, camping supplies, groceries, gas. Their financial situation appeared stable, with a mortgage they'd been paying faithfully for 8 years and modest savings. But as Detective Lisa Morgan dug deeper, troubling inconsistencies emerged. "We found deleted emails on Thomas's school computer," she noted in her report. "Communications with someone named Raven Watcher about a meeting in the mountains. It wasn't clear if this was related to their trip, but it wasn't mentioned to any friends or family." Interviews with colleagues revealed that Thomas had seemed distracted in the weeks before the disappearance. "He was jumpy," said fellow teacher David Winters. "He'd been staying late at school, which wasn't like him. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said he was working on a special project." At the library, Maria's assistant mentioned a strange incident 3 days before the family vanished. "A man came in asking specifically for Maria," she recalled. "Tall guy, heavy-set, with a thick beard. When I told him she was at lunch, he left without leaving a name. Maria returned early that day and seemed upset, but wouldn't say why." These threads led investigators to Victor Blackwood, who owned a hunting cabin about 5 miles from where the Sullivans were supposed to camp. Victor had moved to Oakridge just 2 years earlier, working odd construction jobs and keeping to himself. Initial background checks showed nothing particularly suspicious, a minor assault charge from his 20s that had been dismissed, some financial troubles, but nothing that screamed murderer. When questioned, Blackwood claimed he barely knew the family, having met Thomas only once at a school fundraiser. "I was in Charlotte that weekend visiting my brother," he stated flatly. "I don't know anything about their camping trip." His alibi checked out, phone records placed his mobile device in Charlotte, and his brother confirmed the visit. With no concrete evidence linking him to the disappearance, police couldn't justify pursuing Blackwood further. He became just one of dozens of names in a case file that grew thicker by the day but no closer to resolution. As Christmas approached, the Oakridge community held a candlelight vigil in the town square. Hundreds gathered in the cold, holding photos of the smiling Sullivan family. Emma's second-grade teacher read poems her students had written. James's baseball coach recalled the boys' determination and kindness. Colleagues spoke of Thomas's dedication to his students and Maria's warmth with every person who entered her library. Maria's sister, Diana Reynolds, flew in from Arizona to speak at the vigil. Her voice broke as she addressed the crowd. "Someone knows what happened to my family. Someone has the answer. Please, if you know anything, come forward. We need to bring them home." By January 1997, the once frantic search had settled into a methodical investigation. Chief Donovan assigned Detective Morgan to lead a small team focused exclusively on the Sullivan case. They re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined evidence, and followed up on every tip called into the specially established hotline. But as winter deepened, the trail grew colder. In March 1997, the case was jolted back to life when a hiker found a child's backpack wedged between rocks near Blackwater River, about 7 miles downstream from the cliff where tire tracks had been spotted. The pink backpack, weathered but still intact, contained a library book with Emma Sullivan's name written inside the cover. The discovery triggered a renewed search of the river and surrounding areas. The water level had dropped significantly since November, revealing previously submerged terrain. Teams meticulously combed the riverbanks and shallow waters, but found nothing more. Forensic analysis of the backpack yielded little useful evidence. The months of exposure to the elements had washed away most traces. But its location confirmed what many had feared. At some point, the Sullivans had indeed been in the Blackwater Gorge area, far from their intended campsite. Spring turned to summer, and the investigation continued with diminishing returns. Tips dwindled. Media interest waned. The community's raw grief gradually transformed into a somber acceptance that they might never know what happened to the Sullivan family. On the one-year anniversary of the disappearance, Diana Reynolds established the Sullivan Family Foundation, dedicated to supporting search efforts for missing persons in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She moved to Oakridge permanently, taking up residence in her sister's home, determined to keep the case alive. "I won't let them be forgotten," she told a local reporter. "Whether it takes one more year or 20, I will find out what happened to my family." As 1997 faded into 1998, the Sullivan case officially went cold. Detective Morgan was reassigned to new cases, though she continued to review the Sullivan file in her spare time. Chief Donovan retired, passing the case to his successor with a handwritten note: "Don't let this one go. Something's not right." The Blue Ridge Mountains kept their secret, and the town of Oakridge learned to live with the unanswered questions that haunted their community. The Sullivan family became a cautionary tale, a tragedy whispered about but increasingly less discussed as new residents moved in and time marched forward. Diana Reynolds never wavered in her commitment. Each year on November 9th, she organized a memorial hike along the trail the Sullivans would have taken to their campsite. Each Christmas, she kept their tradition of donating books to the library. And each spring, she returned to the spot where Emma's backpack had been found, searching the banks of Blackwater River, hoping for any clue that might break the case open again. "People think I'm obsessed," she confided to Margaret Phillips one evening in 2000. "Maybe I am. But until I know what happened to them, I can't stop looking." Little did she know that the truth was buried deeper than anyone imagined, not just in the wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains, but in the tangled relationships and hidden resentments of their seemingly peaceful town. The answer to the Sullivan family mystery lay dormant, waiting for technology and persistence to finally bring it to light. By 2006, the Sullivan case had faded from headlines. The family's home, maintained meticulously by Diana Reynolds for a decade, stood as a time capsule of their last day together. Emma's stuffed animals remained arranged on her bed. James's baseball trophies collected dust on a shelf. Thomas's lesson plans still sat in his desk drawer. Even as Oakridge grew and changed around it, the Sullivan house remained frozen in November 1996. Diana had become a familiar, somewhat tragic figure in town, the woman who couldn't let go, who spent her retirement funds pursuing leads that went nowhere. Yet behind her public persistence was a methodical investigator who had compiled volumes of information on her family's disappearance. "People think I'm chasing ghosts," Diana told Margaret Phillips on the 10th anniversary of the disappearance. "But something doesn't add up about Victor Blackwood. His alibi for that weekend, being in Charlotte, I've never believed it." Diana's suspicions stemmed from inconsistencies she'd noted over years of informal investigation. Blackwood claimed to have been in Charlotte the entire weekend, yet a gas station receipt she'd uncovered through public records requests showed his credit card was used in Westbrook, the same town where the Sullivans had their last breakfast, at 11:47 a.m. on that Saturday, just over an hour after they left the diner. When she brought this information to the police in 2001, they dismissed it as circumstantial. "Lots of people passed through Westbrook," the new chief told her. "It doesn't mean he encountered your family." But Diana wouldn't let it go. She began tracking Blackwood's movements around town, noting his routines, his contacts. She observed that he seemed particularly interested whenever the Sullivan case was mentioned at local events. Once, at a memorial fundraiser, she caught him lingering near displays of the family photos, his expression unreadable behind his now gray beard. In 2007, the landscape of criminal investigation changed dramatically with advancements in DNA technology and digital forensics. Cold cases across the country were being reopened and solved through methods unavailable a decade earlier. Diana saw an opportunity and began a campaign to have the Sullivan case re-examined. Her persistence paid off in January 2008, when Detective Alicia Ramirez, a young officer with the State Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit, received the Sullivan file. Fresh out of advanced forensic training, Ramirez approached the case with new eyes and new tools. "The first thing that struck me," Ramirez later wrote in her case notes, "was how little digital investigation had been done. In 1996, email and internet communication were in their infancy, but they existed. The mysterious Raven Watcher emails had never been fully traced." Working with tech specialists, Ramirez dug into the archived data from Thomas Sullivan's school computer. What they found was troubling. Thomas had been exchanging messages with someone who seemed to be threatening him. The emails referred to consequences if you don't pay what you owe and knowing where to find you in the mountains. These digital breadcrumbs led Ramirez to re-examine Victor Blackwood more closely. Background checks more thorough than those available in 1996 revealed that Blackwood had lived in the same town in Ohio where Thomas Sullivan had taught before moving to North Carolina. More surprisingly, financial records showed that Thomas had co-signed a loan for Blackwood in 1994, a loan that had never been repaid. They weren't strangers who met at a school fundraiser, Ramirez told her supervisor. They had a history, one that Thomas apparently wanted to keep secret. When confronted with this information in March 2008, Blackwood admitted to knowing Thomas from Ohio but insisted their relationship had been purely professional. "He helped me out when I needed it. I moved to Oakridge by coincidence, not to follow him." The alibi that had protected Blackwood for years, being in Charlotte with his brother, began to crumble when Ramirez discovered the brother had died in 2003. Phone records that supposedly placed Blackwood in Charlotte could now be re-examined with modern analysis, which revealed something the 1996 technology couldn't. The phone had indeed been in Charlotte, but Blackwood might not have been with it. "It's a technique we see often now," Ramirez explained to Diana. "Leave your phone at your alibi location while you're elsewhere." In 1996, investigators wouldn't have considered that possibility. Despite these developments, the case remained circumstantial. There was still no physical evidence directly linking Blackwood to the Sullivans' disappearance, no bodies, no crime scene. The investigation stalled again, though Ramirez kept the file active, periodically reviewing it for anything they might have missed. In 2011, a major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A conservation team mapping underwater cave systems in Blackwater Gorge discovered what appeared to be vehicle debris wedged in a submerged crevice nearly 30 feet below the surface. Among the items recovered was a license plate, partially corroded but still legible, North Carolina plate FTR 249. When run through the DMV database, it matched the 1992 Chevrolet Impala registered to Thomas and Maria Sullivan. The discovery electrified the community and reinvigorated the investigation. Using specialized equipment, a recovery team from the state police spent weeks methodically exploring the underwater terrain. The work was painstaking and dangerous, with divers navigating narrow passages in near-zero visibility. On July 12, 2011, the team made the discovery everyone had been dreading yet expecting: human remains. 4 sets of skeletal remains, to be exact, found inside what was left of the blue Impala, which had come to rest in a cavern beneath the river surface. The vehicle appears to have entered the water from the cliff area initially searched in 1996, stated the official report. It then was carried by strong currents into a system of underwater caves, explaining why previous search efforts failed to locate it. Forensic analysis confirmed what everyone already knew: the remains belonged to Thomas, Maria, Emma, and James Sullivan. After 15 years, the family had finally been found. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. The medical examiner's report noted that Thomas Sullivan's skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma inconsistent with a car accident. 2 ribs on Maria's remains showed fracture patterns suggesting assault rather than impact trauma. Most disturbing of all, rope fibers were found among the remains, suggesting the possibility that the victims had been restrained. This wasn't an accident, Ramirez told a somber press conference. We're now officially investigating the Sullivan case as a homicide. The town of Oakridge reeled from the news. The narrative many had accepted, a tragic accident on a mountain road, shattered, replaced by something far more sinister. Someone had deliberately harmed this beloved family, pushed their car into the gorge, and walked free for 15 years. Diana Reynolds, now in her 60s, stood stoically at the back of the press conference, her face a mask of grief and vindication. I always knew, she told reporters afterward. A mother knows when her child has been taken by violence. A sister feels it. I've been telling everyone for 15 years this wasn't an accident. With the case now officially a murder investigation, resources poured in. The FBI joined local authorities, bringing additional forensic expertise. Every piece of evidence collected since 1996 was re-examined. Every interview was revisited. The underwater recovery continued yielding crucial evidence. A tire iron found near the vehicle had traces of blood that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Thomas Sullivan. A partial fingerprint on the car's trunk lid, preserved in an area protected from water damage, was run through modern databases. In September 2011, Detective Ramirez requested a warrant to search Victor Blackwood's property, a small house on 5 acres outside of Oakridge. What they found there broke the case wide open. In a locked shed behind his house, investigators discovered camping equipment that matched the brand and type the Sullivan family had owned. Hidden beneath floorboards were several items belonging to the family: Maria's wedding ring, James's baseball glove, and most damning of all, Thomas's wallet containing his driver's license and credit cards. These aren't things you'd find at a crash site, Ramirez noted in her report. These are trophies, kept by someone who wanted mementos of his victims. Also found on the property were financial documents showing that Thomas Sullivan had loaned Blackwood over $50,000, money that had never been reported in the original investigation. Notes in Thomas's handwriting indicated he had been pressing for repayment in the weeks leading up to the family's disappearance. On October 3, 2011, Victor Blackwood was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The man who had lived quietly in their community for 15 years was revealed as the monster who had stolen the Sullivan family. But the arrest was just the beginning. Building a case strong enough for trial would require connecting all the pieces, proving beyond reasonable doubt that Blackwood had murdered the family and staged their disappearance as an accident. As investigators dug deeper into Blackwood's past, they uncovered a pattern of financial fraud and violence. Before coming to North Carolina, he had been investigated for similar schemes in 3 other states, borrowing money with no intention to repay, then disappearing when pressed. What made the Sullivan case different was Thomas's persistence in seeking repayment, and perhaps, his knowledge of Blackwood's past. "We believe Thomas discovered something about Blackwood's history," Ramirez explained to the district attorney. "Something that made him a threat Blackwood couldn't ignore." In early 2012, as prosecutors built their case, another key piece of evidence emerged. A former girlfriend of Blackwood's came forward after seeing news of his arrest. She described a chilling conversation they'd had in 1997, when the Sullivan case was still front-page news. "He told me accidents happen in the mountains all the time," she recalled. "He said sometimes people deserve what they get for not minding their own business." "I didn't connect it to the Sullivans then, but looking back, I know that's what he meant." Throughout 2012, as the case moved toward trial, the town of Oakridge underwent a collective reckoning. How had they lived alongside a murderer for so long? How many of them had exchanged pleasantries with Blackwood, hired him for odd jobs, sat beside him at community events, never suspecting the darkness he harbored? Diana Reynolds watched the process with mixed emotions. The vindication she'd sought for years had come at a terrible cost. The truth she'd pursued had revealed horrors beyond what even she had imagined. Finding them didn't bring closure, she confided to Detective Ramirez one evening. But it did bring justice within reach. For 15 years, he thought he'd gotten away with it. Now he knows he hasn't. As 2012 turned to 2013, prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared for what would be one of the most high-profile murder trials in North Carolina history. The community braced for wounds to be reopened, for details too painful to contemplate to be laid bare in court. But in February 2013, an unexpected development changed everything. Victor Blackwood, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of the death penalty, agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for a sentence of life without parole, he would provide a full confession. On a cold February morning, in a hushed courtroom filled to capacity, Victor Blackwood stood before the judge and admitted what many had suspected for years. Yes, he had known Thomas Sullivan from Ohio. Yes, he had borrowed money he never intended to repay. Yes, he had followed the family to North Carolina when Thomas threatened to expose his fraudulent activities to authorities. "I followed them that day," Blackwood stated in a flat, emotionless voice that chilled everyone present. "I knew they were going camping. I waited until they were on the mountain road, then forced them to pull over. Thomas recognized my car and stopped." The courtroom held its collective breath as Blackwood described confronting Thomas, demanding he drop his threats. When Thomas refused, the situation escalated. "I hit him with the tire iron," Blackwood continued. Maria started screaming. The kids were crying. "I panicked. I hit Maria too. Then I tied them up, put them back in the car, and drove it to the cliff edge." Diana Reynolds, sitting in the front row, gripped Margaret Phillips' hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The clinical detachment with which Blackwood described murdering her family was almost as horrifying as the acts themselves. "I pushed the car over," Blackwood concluded. "Then I took some of their things and left. I watched the search on the news. I knew they were looking in the wrong places. After a while, I figured they'd never find them." When asked by the judge if he had anything else to say, Blackwood shrugged. "I would have gotten away with it if they hadn't found the car. 15 years is a pretty good run." His callousness stunned the courtroom into silence. The judge, visibly shaken, accepted the plea and immediately sentenced Blackwood to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As Blackwood was led away in chains, Diana Reynolds stood. In a voice that carried throughout the courtroom, she called out, "Look at me, Victor." Blackwood turned, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. "For 15 years, I kept their memory alive while you walked free," she said. "But for the rest of your life, you'll be caged like the animal you are, while they live on in the hearts of everyone who loved them. You haven't won anything." A moment of electric tension passed between them. Then Blackwood was gone, led away to begin a lifetime of confinement. Outside the courthouse, beneath a gray February sky, Diana faced a crowd of reporters. "Today doesn't bring my family back," she said. "But it does answer the question that has haunted us for 15 years. Now we know. Now we can truly begin to heal." The case that had defined Oakridge for nearly 2 decades had finally reached its conclusion. The mystery of what happened to the Sullivan family on that November day in 1996 had been solved. The monster responsible would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for Diana Reynolds and the community of Oakridge, the journey wasn't over. There was still the matter of how to honor the Sullivans' memory, how to move forward carrying both the tragedy of their loss and the triumph of justice finally served. In the months following Blackwood's sentencing, Diana worked with the town to establish a permanent memorial. The Sullivan Family Park was dedicated on what would have been Emma's 25th birthday, featuring a library pavilion in honor of Maria, a science learning center named for Thomas, and play areas dedicated to Emma and James. "This is how we transform tragedy into legacy," Diana told the gathered crowd at the dedication ceremony. "This is how we ensure that when people remember the Sullivan family, they remember not just how they died, but how they lived, with kindness, curiosity, and love." Detective Alicia Ramirez, who had played such a crucial role in solving the case, attended the ceremony. As twilight fell and the crowd dispersed, she found herself alone with Diana beside the memorial fountain. "There's something I've always wanted to ask you," Ramirez said quietly. "What kept you going all those years? When everyone else had given up, what made you keep searching?" Diana gazed at the water catching the last light of day, her reflection rippling alongside the engraved names of her family. "Love doesn't end when someone disappears," she answered simply. "Neither does responsibility. Maria was my little sister. I promised our mother I'd always look out for her. Just because I couldn't find her didn't mean I could stop looking." As darkness fell over Oakridge that evening, lights illuminated the memorial, casting a gentle glow over the names of Thomas, Maria, Emma, and James Sullivan. Their story, once defined by mysterious disappearance and unsolved questions, had transformed into something else, a testament to the power of persistence, the advancement of justice, and the enduring strength of love that refuses to surrender to time or tragedy. But even as this chapter closed, another was about to begin, one that would reveal there was still more to the Sullivan story than anyone had imagined. In the summer of 2015, 2 years after Blackwood's conviction, Detective Alicia Ramirez received an unexpected phone call from the warden at Craven Correctional Institution, where Blackwood was serving his life sentences. "He's dying," the warden informed her. "Aggressive pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him 3 months at most. He's asking to speak with you specifically." Ramirez sat silently, processing the information. Her first instinct was to refuse. Blackwood had confessed, justice had been served. What more could there be to say? But 20 years in law enforcement had taught her that deathbed confessions often contain truths withheld for decades. With reluctance, she agreed to meet him one last time. The prison hospital wing was stark and clinical, smelling of antiseptic and despair. Blackwood lay handcuffed to a bed, his once imposing frame now skeletal, skin yellowed with jaundice. Only his eyes remained the same, cold and calculating, even in the face of death. "Detective Ramirez," he whispered, voice raspy. "I knew you'd come." She remained standing at the foot of his bed. "The warden says you wanted to talk to me." Blackwood nodded weakly. "There are things I didn't say in my confession. Things I think you should know before I'm gone." "Why tell me now?" she asked, voice level, betraying no emotion. "Because it doesn't matter now," he replied with a ghastly smile. "But it might to you. To the case." Ramirez pulled a small recorder from her pocket and set it on the bedside table. "Start talking." What Blackwood revealed over the next 2 hours would shatter everything she thought she knew about the Sullivan case. His confession in court had been true but incomplete. The financial dispute with Thomas was real, the murder had happened as described, but there was more, a deeper layer of deception and complicity that had remained hidden. "I wasn't alone that day on the mountain," Blackwood said, his breath labored. "There was someone else with me. Someone who knew what I was planning. Someone who helped." Ramirez leaned forward, pulse quickening. "Who?" "Michael Reynolds," Blackwood replied. "Diana's husband." The name hit Ramirez like a physical blow. Michael Reynolds, Diana's devoted husband of 40 years, who had stood beside her through every vigil, every press conference, every year of searching. The man who had comforted her when the bodies were found, who had held her hand during Blackwood's sentencing. "That's impossible," Ramirez said flatly. "He was one of the first people to report them missing. He's been searching for answers for 20 years. Blackwood's laugh turned into a wheezing cough. "Best cover there is, isn't it? The grieving brother-in-law, supporting his devastated wife? Who would ever suspect him?" As Blackwood's strength waned, he outlined a conspiracy more twisted than anything Ramirez could have imagined. According to him, Michael Reynolds had harbored a deep resentment toward Thomas Sullivan for years. The origin was a business venture gone wrong in the early 1990s, when Thomas had pulled out of a joint investment, costing Michael thousands. The grudge had festered silently for years. When Blackwood arrived in Oakridge and connected with Thomas, he sensed an opportunity. He claimed Michael had approached him after learning about their financial dispute, suggesting they could solve both our problems. He didn't want his wife to know, Blackwood explained weakly. Said she idolized her sister. But he wanted Thomas gone. Said he'd help me if I took care of it. He's the one who told me about their camping trip. He's the one who suggested making it look like an accident. Ramirez struggled to maintain her professional composure. "If this is true, why didn't you mention it during your trial? It might have reduced your sentence." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Michael promised to deposit money for me regularly while I was in prison. Said he'd take care of me as long as I kept him out of it. But the payments stopped last year. So now I'm telling the truth." As the prison doctor entered to administer medication, Ramirez stepped back, mind racing. The recorder continued capturing Blackwood's words, each one adding to the weight pressing on her chest. "Check his finances," Blackwood murmured as the morphine began to take effect. "Look at his phone records from November 1996. He called me 3 times the day before they disappeared. Check the insurance policies. Michael was named as beneficiary on Thomas's life insurance if both he and Maria died. $500,000. 2 days later, Victor Blackwood died without saying anything more." Ramirez was left with a recorded confession that, if true, would tear open a case she thought was closed and devastate a woman who had already suffered beyond measure. Her first instinct was to dismiss Blackwood's claims as the spiteful lies of a dying murderer. But 20 years of detective work had taught her to follow evidence, not assumptions. With heavy reluctance, she began a quiet investigation into Michael Reynolds. What she found disturbed her deeply. Records showed Michael had indeed been named as a secondary beneficiary on Thomas Sullivan's life insurance policy, a fact never highlighted in the original investigation because the bodies hadn't been found. The policy had paid out in 2004, after the Sullivans were legally declared dead. The amount, $525,000. Phone records from 1996 were harder to access, but with a court order, Ramirez obtained archived records from the telephone company. 3 calls had been placed from Michael Reynolds' home phone to Victor Blackwood's number on November 8, 1996, the day before the Sullivans disappeared. Most damning of all was a bank account Ramirez discovered in Charlotte, opened under a false name but with Michael Reynolds' social security number. Between 2013 and 2014, regular payments of $5,000 had been deposited into an account at the prison commissary belonging to Victor Blackwood. In October 2015, Ramirez brought her findings to the district attorney. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. The DA authorized a deeper investigation, but cautioned against moving too quickly. "If Reynolds is innocent, we destroy a man who's already suffered immensely. If he's guilty, we need an airtight case." The investigation proceeded in absolute secrecy. Ramirez assembled a small team who worked independently from the main department. They traced financial records, interviewed former colleagues of both Michael and Thomas, and quietly built a case. In December 2015, they uncovered the final piece, a storage unit rented in Charlotte under the same false name as the bank account. Inside, they found original documents related to the failed business venture between Michael and Thomas, angry letters Michael had written but never sent, and most incriminating of all, a notebook detailing the plan to make Thomas pay with dates, times, and mentions of VB helping. On January 7, 2016, nearly 20 years after the Sullivan family disappeared, Detective Ramirez arrived at the Reynolds home with a warrant for Michael's arrest. Diana opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of the detective who had become a friend after solving her family's case. "Alicia. What a surprise. Come in, Michael just made coffee." Ramirez would later describe this as the most difficult moment of her career. The look on Diana's face as uniformed officers entered behind her, as Ramirez explained why they were there, as the warrant was read aloud, it was a look of incomprehension so profound it bordered on physical pain. "This is a mistake," Diana kept saying, her voice rising with each repetition. "Michael has been with me every step. He couldn't have. He wouldn't have." Michael Reynolds, 68 years old with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, offered no resistance. As officers handcuffed him, he looked at his wife with an expression both tender and resigned. "I'm sorry, Dee," he said softly. "I never meant for it to go this far." Diana collapsed into a chair, her world shattering for the second time in 20 years. The arrest of Michael Reynolds sent shockwaves through Oakridge. News vans once again lined the streets. Reporters who had covered the original disappearance, the discovery of the bodies, and Blackwood's conviction returned to tell a story none could have anticipated. For the community, it was a betrayal beyond comprehension. This man who had stood beside Diana at every vigil, who had helped build the memorial park, who had comforted grieving residents, he had been complicit in the very tragedy they had all mourned together. In the months that followed, as the prosecution built their case, painful details emerged. Michael had indeed approached Blackwood after discovering his financial dispute with Thomas. What began as venting between two men with grudges evolved into a plan. Blackwood would confront Thomas during the camping trip, force him to sign documents transferring property as repayment, and intimidate him into silence. But something went wrong on the mountain road. Thomas refused to cooperate. The confrontation escalated to violence. And once it began, neither man saw a way out except to eliminate all witnesses, including Maria and the children. Michael hadn't been present for the actual murders. He had provided information, suggested the location, and helped create the alibi Blackwood would use. But under North Carolina law, this made him equally culpable for the deaths. The trial began in September 2016. Diana attended every day, sitting alone in the back row, her face a mask of grief and betrayal. She made eye contact with neither the prosecutors nor her husband. The evidence was presented methodically, the financial motive, the phone records, the storage unit contents, the insurance payout, and Blackwood's deathbed confession. Michael's defense team argued that Blackwood was lying to exact revenge from beyond the grave, but the financial paper trail proved too strong to dismiss. On the final day of the trial, Michael Reynolds requested to make a statement. Standing before the court, he turned not toward the judge but toward his wife. "I never wanted Maria or the children harmed," he said, voice breaking. "I was angry at Thomas, yes. I wanted him to feel some of the financial pain he'd caused me. But what happened on that mountain wasn't what I agreed to. By the time I knew what Blackwood had done, it was too late." He paused, tears streaming down his weathered face. "And then you were in so much pain, Diana. I couldn't bear to add to it by confessing. Each year that passed made it harder to tell the truth. So I became what you needed, the supportive husband, the grieving brother-in-law. I told myself I was protecting you. But I was only protecting myself." Diana sat motionless, tears falling silently, as the man she had loved for 4 decades revealed himself as a stranger. "I don't ask for forgiveness," Michael concluded. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that every tear I shed for them was real. Every hour I spent searching with you was my penance. I love them too, even as I betrayed them." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on 4 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. the judge sentenced Michael Reynolds to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the same sentence his co-conspirator had received 3 years earlier. As Michael was led away, Diana finally spoke, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom, 20 years of lies. You let me search and hope and grieve, knowing all along. That's a cruelty even Blackwood didn't inflict. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, seeking comment from the woman who had become a symbol of perseverance only to have that narrative shattered. Detective Ramirez stepped in, shielding Diana from the cameras and guiding her to a waiting car. How do you begin again after this? Diana asked as they drove away, her voice hollow. How do you trust anything when the person closest to you could do something so unimaginable? Ramirez had no answers, only a promise, one day at a time. And you won't do it alone. In the aftermath of Michael's conviction, Diana Reynolds retreated from public life. The Sullivan Family Memorial Park remained open, but she no longer attended events there. She sold the house she had shared with Michael and moved to a small apartment on the other side of town. For months, she spoke only to Margaret Phillips and occasionally to Detective Ramirez. The community of Oakridge, rocked by this final tragic chapter, struggled to reconcile 2 decades of shared grief with the revelation that one of their own had been partly responsible. Some residents suggested removing Michael's name from the memorial park's dedication plaque. Others felt that erasing him from the narrative would be yet another distortion of a truth already too painful to bear. In April 2017, 6 months after the trial, Diana made her first public appearance since her husband's conviction. The occasion was the 20th anniversary of the Sullivan Family Foundation, the organization she had established to support searches for missing persons. Standing before a smaller crowd than in previous years, Diana spoke with a strength that surprised even those who knew her best. For 20 years, I searched for the truth about what happened to my sister and her family, she began. When Victor Blackwood was arrested and confessed, I thought that search was over. I was wrong. The final truth was hidden in the place I never thought to look, my own home, my own marriage. Her voice remained steady as she continued. I've asked myself countless times if I should have known. If there were signs I missed. If my determination to find Maria blinded me to the deception right beside me. These questions have no satisfying answers. She looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with faces both familiar and new. But here's what I do know, the search for truth, however painful, matters. Justice, however delayed, matters. And most importantly, how we honor those we've lost matters. Diana announced that the Sullivan Family Foundation would be expanding its mission. In addition to supporting search efforts for missing persons, it would now provide resources for families healing from the trauma of violent crime, with a special focus on those betrayed by those closest to them. From this unimaginable pain, something meaningful can still grow, she concluded. Not because of the men who took my family, but in spite of them. Maria, Thomas, Emma, and James deserved better than the ending they were given. By continuing their legacy of kindness and education, we ensure that their story doesn't end with tragedy. We write a new chapter, one of healing and hope. As Diana stepped away from the microphone, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Many were crying, moved by the resilience of a woman who had every reason to surrender to bitterness but chose a different path. In the months and years that followed, Diana's prediction proved true. The expanded foundation became a lifeline for families across North Carolina and beyond. The Sullivan case, with its twists and betrayals, became a case study in police academies, teaching future detectives about the importance of revisiting evidence, questioning assumptions, and never considering a case truly closed until all inconsistencies are resolved. Detective Alicia Ramirez, whose persistence had uncovered the final layer of the Sullivan tragedy, received commendations but found them hollow. For her, the case represented both her greatest professional achievement and her most painful human experience, bringing truth to Diana Reynolds while simultaneously destroying what remained of her life. In 2019, Ramirez was promoted to head of the State Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit. At her investiture ceremony, she spoke about the lessons the Sullivan case had taught her. We think of justice as something clear and absolute, she told the audience of officers and officials. But real justice is messy. It comes in layers. It requires us to keep asking questions even when we think we have answers. Even when those questions lead to places we don't want to go. She glanced at Diana, seated in the front row. The true measure of our work isn't in convictions or closures. It's in our commitment to truth, whatever form it takes, whatever pain it brings. Because only truth, however delayed or difficult, can begin the process of healing. That summer, on what would have been Emma Sullivan's 31st birthday, a new wing was added to the Oakridge Public Library. The Emma Sullivan Children's Reading Room was filled with comfortable. Persistence had uncovered the final layer of the Sullivan tragedy, received commendations but found them hollow. For her, the case represented both her greatest professional achievement and her most painful human experience, bringing truth to Diana Reynolds while simultaneously destroying what remained of her life. The investigation had changed Ramirez in profound ways. The betrayal that had blindsided Diana forced her to re-examine her own assumptions about human nature and relationships. She began specializing in cold cases where family members or close friends were potential suspects, developing techniques to identify the subtle patterns of deception that can persist for decades. By 2020, Ramirez had become a nationally recognized expert in complex cold cases. She had solved 6 more cases where the perpetrator had been hiding in plain sight, living seemingly normal lives while carrying devastating secrets. Each time she made an arrest, she thought of Diana Reynolds and the look on her face that January morning in 2016. In late 2020, as the world grappled with a global pandemic, Ramirez received an unexpected email from an attorney in Charlotte. Michael Reynolds, now 73 and in failing health, wanted to speak with her one last time. "I've been diagnosed with terminal heart failure," the attorney's message explained. Michael understands he will die in prison, but he says there are things about the Sullivan case he never revealed, even during his trial. "He specifically asked for you." Ramirez's first instinct was to refuse. The case was closed. Justice had been served. Reopening old wounds seemed cruel, particularly to Diana, who had finally begun to rebuild her life. But the detective in her couldn't ignore the possibility of undiscovered truths. After consulting with the district attorney and reaching out to Diana for her permission, Ramirez drove to the prison hospital where Michael Reynolds had been transferred. The man who awaited her bore little resemblance to the silver-haired husband who had stood by Diana's side for 20 years. Prison had aged him dramatically. His face was gaunt, his breathing labored, his hands trembling as they rested on the hospital blanket. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have much time left." Ramirez remained standing, her expression neutral. "The attorney said you have information about the Sullivan case you never shared." Michael nodded weakly. "There's one more piece you don't know. Something I've carried alone all these years." He gestured toward a small notebook on the bedside table. "I've written it all down. The whole truth. I want you to have it, but I need you to promise me something first." "I don't make promises to murderers," Ramirez replied evenly. A flicker of pain crossed Michael's face. "Fair enough. But what I'm asking isn't for me. It's for Diana." He took a labored breath before continuing. "The notebook contains information about assets she doesn't know about. Money I put aside before everything happened. Money that should be hers now. I've arranged for it all to be transferred to the Sullivan Foundation upon my death. But there are things in here that could hurt her even more, if made public. I'm asking for discretion, not concealment." Ramirez considered his words carefully. "I can promise to protect Diana from unnecessary pain. I can't promise to hide evidence." Michael seemed to accept this, nodding slightly. "That's all I can ask." He pushed the notebook toward her with trembling fingers. "It started long before Blackwood came to town. The truth is darker than anyone knows." When Ramirez opened the notebook later that evening, sitting alone in her hotel room, what she read stunned her. Michael's confession went beyond his conspiracy with Blackwood. It revealed a decade-long pattern of financial manipulation, hidden debts, and mounting desperation. Thomas Sullivan hadn't simply pulled out of a business deal, as Michael had claimed. He had discovered that Michael had been embezzling funds from their joint venture. Thomas had confronted him privately, giving him the chance to repay the money before going to authorities. "I was drowning in debt," Michael wrote. "Gambling problems I had hidden from Diana for years. Thomas gave me 6 months to make it right. I couldn't do it." When Blackwood arrived in town with his own grudge against Thomas, it seemed like fate. The notebook detailed how Michael had manipulated both men, feeding Thomas's concern about Blackwood's loan while simultaneously stoking Blackwood's resentment. He had orchestrated their conflict, never intending it to end in violence, but creating the conditions for tragedy. Most shocking was Michael's admission that he had been at the mountain that day. Not present during the murders, as he had claimed in court, but waiting nearby. When things went wrong, when Blackwood panicked and killed the entire family, Michael had helped dispose of evidence and create the alibi. "I heard the children screaming," he wrote in shaky handwriting. "I could have stopped it. I could have saved them. But I was a coward. I drove away. And every day since, I've heard those screams in my dreams." The final pages revealed something no investigation had uncovered: a safety deposit box in a Charlotte bank, opened under a false name, containing $1.2 million in bearer bonds and cash. Money Michael had been skimming from various sources for years, including the insurance payout from Thomas's policy. "This money is blood money," he concluded. "It belongs to Diana and the foundation now. It can't bring them back. It can't undo what I did. But maybe it can help others. Maybe it can be part of the redemption I'll never live to see." 2 days after Ramirez's visit, Michael Reynolds died in his sleep. The detective found herself in the uncomfortable position of executor to his final confession. She delivered the notebook to the district attorney, but with a carefully worded recommendation that certain details be kept confidential unless directly relevant to other investigations. The financial information was another matter. Working with the bank and Michael's attorney, Ramirez confirmed the existence of the safety deposit box and its contents. The legal process to transfer the assets to Diana and the foundation was complex but clear. When Ramirez finally sat down with Diana to explain what she had discovered, she chose her words carefully. "Michael left funds that he wanted directed to the foundation," she explained, sliding a document across the table. "It's substantial. Enough to expand your work significantly." Diana stared at the figure, her expression unreadable. "Blood money," she said softly, echoing Michael's own words though she couldn't have known them. "Yes," Ramirez acknowledged. "But you could transform it into something meaningful." Diana was silent for a long moment, tracing the numbers with her fingertip. "Did he say anything else? Anything about why?" Ramirez hesitated. "He wrote about his regrets. About his cowardice. About hearing the children's screams." Diana closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He was there," she whispered. "All these years, I imagined him innocent of the actual violence. But he was there. Not at the murder itself," Ramirez clarified. "But nearby. He could have intervened. He chose not to." Diana nodded, as if this confirmation aligned with something she had already suspected. "Thank you for your honesty, Alicia. I've had enough lies to last several lifetimes." In the days that followed, Diana made a decision that surprised many but seemed fitting to those who knew her best. She accepted the money but created a completely separate foundation with it, the Emma and James Sullivan Memorial Fund, dedicated exclusively to supporting children who had lost parents to violent crime. The adult victims in this tragedy made their choices, she told the board of directors at the fund's first meeting. Thomas and Maria didn't, but they were adults with agency. Emma and James were innocents, robbed of their entire futures. This money will go toward giving other children what they lost, a chance. By the spring of 2021, 25 years after the Sullivan family disappeared, the dual legacies Diana had created from tragedy were flourishing. The original Sullivan Family Foundation had expanded its missing persons work across 3 states. The Emma and James Memorial Fund had established scholarships, therapy programs, and summer camps for traumatized children. Diana herself had emerged as a powerful advocate for victims' rights and a sought-after speaker on resilience. Her silver hair and quiet dignity made her instantly recognizable at conferences and legislative hearings. Behind the scenes, she worked closely with Detective Ramirez to develop protocols for supporting families during extended cold case investigations. On what would have been Emma Sullivan's 33rd birthday, Diana and Ramirez met at the Sullivan Family Memorial Park. The detective brought coffee, Diana brought flowers for the memorial fountain. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching children play on equipment dedicated to Emma and James. "I've been thinking about truth lately," Diana said finally. "About how we imagine it as this pure, healing thing. But it's not always, is it?" Ramirez considered the question carefully. "I think truth is necessary but not sufficient. What matters is what we do with it." Diana nodded, watching a little girl about Emma's age swing higher and higher, her face alight with joy. 25 years ago, all I wanted was to know what happened to them. I thought that knowledge alone would bring peace. I was wrong. You've done more than find peace, Ramirez observed. You've created meaning. Not just me, Diana said, turning to look at the detective. You could have stopped after Blackwood's conviction. You could have left the case closed, left me with simpler truths. But you didn't. Ramirez smiled sadly. My job is to find the truth, however uncomfortable. Your job is the harder one, living with it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the memorial park, Diana shared her latest project. The Sullivan case, with all its complexities and betrayals, was being developed into a curriculum for law enforcement training. It would teach not just investigative techniques but ethical considerations and victim support strategies. Maria was a teacher, Diana explained. Thomas too. They believed in education as a path to something better. It seems fitting that even in death, they're still teaching. Ramirez nodded, understanding the symmetry of it. And what about you? What's next for Diana Reynolds? Diana watched the last rays of sunlight illuminate the names of her family on the memorial fountain. I'm writing a book. Not just about the case, but about what came after. About rebuilding when everything you thought was solid turns to sand. About finding purpose in pain. I'd like to read that, Ramirez said softly. You'll get the first copy, Diana promised. After all, you're part of the story now. The detective who never stopped looking deeper, even when the case seemed solved. As they gathered their things to leave, a young woman approached them hesitantly. In her early 20s, with curly hair and earnest eyes, she seemed familiar though Ramirez couldn't place her. Ms. Reynolds, the young woman said. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to thank you. The Emma and James Scholarship Fund put me through college after my parents were killed. I graduated last month. I'm starting law school in the fall. Diana's face softened as she embraced the young woman. That's wonderful. What's your name? Hope, the young woman replied. Hope Davis. Perfect name, Diana said with a genuine smile. What kind of law are you planning to practice? Victim advocacy, Hope answered without hesitation. Because of people like you and Detective Ramirez, I'm alive and thriving instead of just surviving. I want to pay that forward. After Hope left, Diana and Ramirez walked slowly toward the parking lot. That's it, right there, Diana said, her voice thick with emotion. That's why all of this matters. Hope Davis will help others who will help others. The ripples keep spreading. From tragedy to legacy, Ramirez murmured. Exactly. Diana paused at her car door. We can't change what happened in 1996. We can't bring them back. But we can make sure their story keeps creating something good in the world. As Diana drove away, Ramirez remained in the parking lot for a moment, watching the lights come on around the memorial fountain. In her 2 decades of police work, she had seen how violence created endless ripples of trauma and loss. But the Sullivan case had shown her something else, how those same ripples, channeled through courage and compassion, could become forces for healing and change. The North Carolina cold case that had shocked and mystified a community for 25 years had transformed into something no one could have predicted. Not just a cautionary tale about betrayal and justice delayed, but a testament to the human capacity for resilience and meaning-making in the face of unimaginable loss. In her office at the State Bureau of Investigation, Ramirez kept a small photograph on her desk. Not the Sullivan family in their final days, but Diana standing with scholarship recipients at the first Emma and James Memorial Fund ceremony. It reminded her daily that her work wasn't just about solving crimes or closing cases, but about creating possibilities for healing in their aftermath. The Sullivan case would never truly be over. It would continue to teach, to inspire, to caution, and to heal, a living legacy that had emerged from the darkest of circumstances. As the 25th anniversary of the disappearance approached, journalists from across the country contacted Diana for interviews. Most expected to find a bitter woman, irrevocably scarred by dual betrayals. Instead, they encountered someone who had transformed suffering into purpose, grief into action, and tragedy into hope. "How did you do it?" one reporter asked during a televised interview. "How did you not break under the weight of it all?" Diana considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "I did break," she admitted. "Several times. But breaking isn't the end of the story. It's what you build from the pieces that matters." The camera panned to show the Sullivan family memorial park behind her, children laughing on playgrounds, teenagers reading in the Maria Sullivan Library Pavilion, families picnicking near the memorial fountain. "I couldn't save my family," Diana continued. "But their story has saved others. There are children alive today because a mother remembered Emma's. Dinner's ready. Everyone's waiting for you." "Just taking in the view," I said, smiling. "It's exactly as you designed it all those years ago, the perfect angle to catch the sunset." She joined me at the railing. "I can't believe we actually built it. That teenage dream. That's what architects do," I reminded her. "We make dreams tangible. We create spaces for life to unfold." She linked her arm through mine in a gesture that had become familiar again these past months. "Speaking of which, Theo and I have been talking. We're thinking of moving into the cottage on the property. It's a short commute to my gallery, and the school district is excellent." The cottage, a smaller structure we had added to the property during construction, originally intended for a caretaker or visiting friends. "You'd be welcome," I said carefully. "But are you sure that's what you want?" She nodded. "The divorce will be final next month. I'm ready for a fresh start, away from the house Richard and I shared. And Theo adores spending time with you. You've seen how he lights up when you teach him about buildings. He has a natural aptitude for spatial thinking," I observed, professional pride barely masking my deeper joy at the possibility of having them nearby. "Wonder where he got that," she teased. Inside, someone called our names. We turned together toward the warm light spilling from the house, my house, designed years ago by a daughter who wanted to create the perfect space for her father's future. A future that had arrived in ways neither of us could have predicted. "You know," I said as we walked inside, "I never did get to make that birthday speech." Eliza squeezed my arm. "There's always 71. And there was. My 71st birthday was celebrated on this very deck, surrounded by people who truly saw me, colleagues who respected my work, friends who valued my company, family who loved me for who I was, not what I owned." When the cake was presented and the candles lit, Eliza didn't cut me off. Instead, she handed me a microphone with a smile. "Everyone," she announced, "my father has a few words he'd like to share." I stood, taking in the expectant faces, the genuine interest, the respect in their expressions. So different from the previous year, when my voice had been deemed unnecessary, unwelcome. "At 71, I began, I've learned that the most important thing we build isn't made of concrete or steel. It's the courage to speak our truth, even when others would silence us. It's the wisdom to distinguish between voices that guide us forward and those that hold us back. And it's the strength to stand firm in our own value, even when others try to reduce us to what we own rather than who we are." As I spoke, I watched Eliza's face, open, attentive, no longer afraid of what I might say or how it might reflect on her. She had found her own voice again, separate from Richard's influence, reconnected to the values that had shaped her childhood. To everyone gathered here today, I concluded, thank you for being part of this journey, this ongoing project we call life. The blueprints keep changing, the renovations never quite end, but with the right people around us, every phase has its own beauty, its own purpose. Even at 71, perhaps especially at 71, the design continues to evolve. The applause was genuine, the conversations that followed authentic. No one checked their watch or made excuses to leave early. No one treated me as if my thoughts were rambling or irrelevant. I was Harold Mitchell, father, architect, mentor, friend. A complete person, not a problem to be managed or an asset to be controlled. Later, as guests departed and twilight settled over the lake, I found myself alone on the deck once more. The house behind me, the physical manifestation of my daughter's teenage vision for my future, stood solid and welcoming. But it was the less tangible structure we had rebuilt, the foundation of truth, the framework of respect, the space for authentic connection, that gave me the deepest satisfaction. At 71, I had reclaimed my voice. And in doing so, I had helped my daughter reclaim hers as well. Together, we were building something that would last far longer than any structure of wood and stone, a legacy of courage, integrity, and the unwavering belief that no one is too old to stand firm in their own value. As the stars appeared over the lake, I made a silent promise to that younger self who had been silenced at his birthday party: your voice matters. Your experience matters. Your boundaries matter. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise has revealed more about their character than about yours. The light from Theo's room spilled onto the lawn as he prepared for bed. Eliza's shadow moved past windows as she tidied the kitchen. Sounds of life, of family, of connection restored through honest confrontation and careful rebuilding. This, I thought, is the true architecture of a meaningful life, not the structures we build from physical materials, but the boundaries we establish, the truths we honor, and the love we cultivate despite the inevitable renovations time demands of us all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.